15 years had passed since the first day of judgment, the day when the earth cracked open and monsters poured out to cull the human race. They came without warning, rising from wells deep underground, tearing through cities, devouring millions. Bullets, bombs, and firepower barely scratched them, and when their task was done, they disappeared, retreating back into the depths as suddenly as they had emerged. In the aftermath, survivors buried their dead and sealed the wells with massive steel gates, praying it would hold. Now the world had rebuilt, but beneath the surface, fear still pulsed. Laura adjusted the stack of papers on her desk, glancing out the school window at the construction cranes clawing at the skyline. Life had almost returned to normal, or at least the new version of normal. She tucked a lock of hair behind her ear, pushing back the familiar unease gnawing at her chest. The news had been relentless: dead fish washing ashore, tremors rattling cities, scientists muttering about seismic spikes. And then, of course, the eclipse. The same eclipse that had darkened the skies 15 years ago. "Hey, Laura," Milton's voice broke into her thoughts, light and uncertain. She turned to find him at her classroom door, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Milton, her friend, her stubborn, endlessly patient friend, smiled nervously. "Dinner tonight?" Laura offered him the same half-smile she'd given a dozen times before, but this time she heard herself say, "Sure, Milton." She didn't know why she agreed. Maybe it was the heaviness in the air, maybe it was the old ache still buried deep, or maybe it was the image of David walking out the door all those years ago, leaving her pregnant and alone to face the end of the world. Tyler, their son, was 15 now, the same age as the judgment. He spent most of his time at the skate park, wheels rattling over cracked pavement, trying to forget the weight his parents carried. His girlfriend, Maddie, was jumpy these days, her eyes flicking nervously to the sky, but Tyler always brushed it off. He had inherited his mother's stubbornness and his father's recklessness. Back at David's apartment, the tension was thick. David and Tyler's weekends together were always tightrope walks over old wounds. Laura's voice on the phone was sharp, clipped, warning David that Milton had secured shelter space for them. David bristled. "He's my son too, Laura. He's safe with me." But as they argued, Tyler slipped out the door, his phone buzzing with a message from Maddie. By nightfall, the soldiers were everywhere. Convoys rolled through the streets, checkpoints sprang up, and the news blared grim updates. Military drills, unexplained power surges, animal migrations. Panic simmered just below the surface. At the skate park, Tyler wrapped an arm around Maddie, her face pale with worry. She leaned into him, whispering, "I'm scared, Ty." "What if they come back?" He squeezed her tight. "I'm not leaving you. I'm not my dad." The sky deepened to an eerie orange as the eclipse edged closer. Across town, David's phone rang, sharp in the silence. Ted's voice crackled through. "Tomorrow, David. Get to the shelter. I mean it." David's stomach clenched. He dropped the phone and ran to Tyler's room, empty. Meanwhile, Laura's heart thudded in her chest as Milton checked his watch again. "The shelter's filling up," he said urgently. Laura's hands shook as she dialed David. "He's at the skate park," Milton murmured, tracking Tyler's phone. David pushed through stalled traffic, abandoning his car when the roads clogged with people fleeing the city. The first breach was reported under one of the protective domes, a monster tearing through the ground, unstoppable. Soldiers fired helplessly as the creature devoured everything in its path. At the skate park, Tyler and Maddie heard the first piercing cries, birds scattering in a black wave across the sky. Screams followed. David sprinted, lungs burning as sirens wailed in the distance. He found Tyler and Maddie huddled behind a concrete ramp. Tyler threw his arms around his father. "She doesn't have anyone," he said breathlessly, glancing at Maddie. Moments later, Laura's car screeched to a stop, Milton at the wheel. The group piled in, racing toward the shelter as the city fell apart around them. But at the gates of the shelter, a cold truth awaited them. Only women and children were allowed in now. David's jaw tightened. "Take care of your mother," he whispered, pushing Tyler toward Laura. Yet, when Tyler reached the front of the line, he spun back, eyes blazing. "I'm not leaving him." He darted through the crowd, Laura and Maddie shouting after him. The shelter doors slammed shut behind them. Panic roared through the streets. David's fists clenched as Laura sobbed, Milton shouting about a basement at the local school. Tyler and David argued, Laura torn between them. In the sky, the eclipse reached its peak, a dark eye staring down at a terrified world. And then the earth trembled, a long, deep crack splitting through concrete and steel. The monsters had returned. The eclipse hung over the city like a bruise, turning day into a flickering nightmare. As the first of the monsters ripped through the protective domes, the world descended into chaos. Screams echoed through the streets, helicopters thundered overhead, and the choking stench of smoke filled the air. David gripped the wheel as Laura, Tyler, Maddie, and Milton crammed into the car, their breaths quick and sharp. Traffic snarled in every direction, cars abandoned as people fled on foot. "Where are we going?" Laura shouted over the din, twisting in her seat to glance at David. "Ted's bunker. In the desert," David barked back, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror where dark shapes darted between buildings. Milton's knuckles were white on the dashboard. "No, the school. There's a basement. We can make it there." David slammed his hand on the wheel. "It won't hold. You don't understand." "I understand," Milton snapped, voice cracking with panic. "It's my car, and I say we go to the school." The argument exploded in the cramped car, voices clashing as the city crumbled outside. But it ended in an instant. A shadow fell across the road, a monstrous bird swept from the sky, and in one sickening moment, Milton was gone. His scream was cut short as the beast carried him into the clouds. Laura let out a raw, broken cry, but David didn't stop. He shoved her back into the car and hit the gas, weaving through wreckage and fire. Tyler clutched Maddie, his face pale and grim. As they neared Ted's bunker, the world seemed to unravel. Buildings collapsed in slow-motion falls. Soldiers fired desperately at creatures immune to their bullets, and people ran without direction, some falling and never rising again. They reached the bunker and pounded on the heavy metal door. Above them, a camera whirred, its tiny lens flicking toward them, but the door stayed shut. Inside, Ted sat frozen, a gun pressed to his temple, Garrett Jensen's finger tight on the trigger. "Come on," Laura sobbed, slamming her fists on the door. "Ted, Please!" For a breathless second, they thought they were lost. Then the door groaned open. They tumbled inside, gasping as it slammed shut behind them. Ted embraced David roughly, his face streaked with sweat and fear. His wife Stella hovered nearby, pale and trembling. In the corner, Garrett watched them, his eyes sharp, his uniform rumpled, a rifle resting too casually across his lap. Dinner was a tense, uneven affair. Garrett leaned back in his chair, recounting his survival during the first attack. The screams of 150 co-workers at the refinery, his own desperate plunge into a salty mud pond as the monsters passed him by. His voice was calm, too calm, as he spoke of the creatures' hunger for flesh and souls, of Judgment Day, of the devil's hand in their design. While Garrett spoke, Ted met David's eyes across the table, subtly gesturing toward a knife. David understood, but the real danger was already inside. A rustling sound broke the thick silence. Without warning, a centipede-like creature burst from a crack in the wall, sinking its jaws into Stella's shoulder. Chaos erupted. Ted tore it away, burning it with salt. David wrestled Garrett for the gun, and Maddie, wide-eyed with terror, hacked off the monster's head with a kitchen knife. Stella bled heavily, her breaths shallow. Ted cradled her, his voice cracking as he tried to reassure her. Garrett stood, brushing dust from his sleeves, and suggested calmly that they abandon the bunker, that the school, the hills, anywhere would be safer now. Reluctantly, they packed what they could. Garrett's infection, a dark bloom under his skin, spread further up his arm. Outside, the world was burning. The group stumbled through the tunnel Ted led them to, the ground shaking under their feet. They emerged into the open, stumbling toward Garrett's car hidden in the valley. Maddie paused, staring at the twitching body of a dead monster. Without warning, a tentacle shot out from a hole nearby, wrapping around her leg. Tyler and David rushed forward, hacking at it, freeing her just as more creatures burst from the ground. Panic surged. Garrett pleaded to be untied, flashing the infected wound on his arm, and David, against his better judgment, cut him loose. Garrett scrambled toward the car, feverishly jamming the keys into the ignition as the first monsters crested the ridge. The engine sputtered. Stella, eyes dark with pain and understanding, reached for Ted's gun. Ted caught her wrist, whispering frantically as the creatures closed in. Garrett, in a blind rush, finally got the engine roaring and slammed the gas, trying to drive off without them, only to have Maddie's knife pressed to his throat from the back seat. Stella stepped from the car, walking calmly toward the monsters. Ted's screams split the night as David wrenched him into the car, tires screaming as they fled. The city burned behind them, a wall of flame and shadow. Radio reports crackled through the speakers. Bunkers failing, shelters overrun, survivors dwindling by the hour. In the dark, Laura reached across the seat and gripped David's shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were still alive. For now. The car crawled up the last steep hill, the engine rattling like a dying heart. Beyond the rise, the government gate stood, a massive skeletal structure of steel and concrete meant to hold back the monsters. But as David's hands tightened on the wheel, they all saw it. The gate was broken. The lights were out. The towers were crumbling, and the earth beneath the silence trembled. David killed the engine. No one spoke. Tyler leaned forward between the front seats, his face pale, his eyes darting from the gate to his father, then to Laura. Maddie clutched Tyler's hand so tightly, her knuckles were white. Ted sat slumped, his face buried in trembling hands, Stella's absence a raw wound on his chest. Garrett, silent now, his skin blackened with infection, clenched his jaw and stared at the gate as if it owed him a debt. Inside, the facility was a graveyard, papers scattered across the floor, blood smeared along the walls, bodies, soldiers, workers, twisted where they had fallen, their faces frozen in shock and pain. "We need to move," David whispered. Garrett led them through dark hallways, his limp worsening, muttering about a chemical warehouse on the far side of the compound. He claimed the doors were reinforced, the tanks full of salt water, the only weapon they had left. In a narrow corridor, Garrett stumbled, dropping to one knee. When David reached to help him, Garrett shoved him back, his face drenched in sweat. "I'll get us through this," he panted. "I survived once. I'll survive again." David's mouth tightened, but he nodded. For now. Suddenly, a roar shattered the air. The walls shook. They had been seen. David grabbed Tyler's shoulders. "Take care of your mom," he said roughly. Laura's eyes flashed, the same fear, the same stubborn anger she had felt 15 years ago when he walked away. "David." But David kissed her forehead and was already gone. He raced through the vents, his body scraping against metal, heart hammering as he crawled above the warehouse. Below, a hulking monster bent over a soldier's corpse, its massive claws dripping red. David held his breath, counted to 3, and dropped. The taps groaned as he yanked them open. Salt water surged through pipes, flooding the room. The monster reared, howling, thrashing, its skin smoking as the salt hit. David scrambled back into the vents, but the monster lunged. It caught his leg. Pain ripped through him as claws dug deep. Blindly, David fumbled for the pouch at his belt, yanked it open, and flung salt into the creature's face. It shrieked, convulsed, and crumbled into ash. Across the compound, Laura, Tyler, Maddie, and Ted ran, the monsters closing in from every side. Tyler spun, firing stolen rounds into the dark, while Maddie jammed kitchen knives between the boards of barricaded doors. Ted's voice broke as he roared, swinging an axe into one of the creatures. Once, twice, 3 times, before it tore him down, his last cry shaking Laura to her core. Tyler's fingers slammed the fire alarm. Jets of salt water burst from the ceiling, slamming into the monsters, hissing and crackling as the beasts collapsed. But the victory was brief. Garrett emerged from the shadows, gun trembling in his hand, his face contorted by pain and fever. "This world isn't ours anymore," he rasped. "It never was." He raised the gun at Tyler, fired. The shot hit Tyler's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Laura threw herself over her son, screaming. Garrett stepped closer, eyes black as the infection spread up his neck. And then David arrived. The fire extinguisher hit Garrett's skull with a crack. The man crumpled, just as a massive shadow loomed behind him. A monster, skeletal and horned, swallowed Garrett in a single snap of its jaws. Go! David roared, pulling Laura, Tyler, and Maddie to their feet. They sprinted into the medical unit, jamming salt canisters into a pressure cylinder. As the monster slammed against the door, David wrenched the cylinder free, shoving it into the creature's open mouth. The explosion shook the ground, ripped through the hallways, and sent the monster's body crashing into the rubble. When the dust cleared, the eclipse was over. Outside, the last of the monsters were retreating, crawling, slithering, flying back into the depths of the wells. The survivors stepped into the light, broken and breathless. Tyler winced as Laura wrapped her arms around him. David's hands were raw, his shoulders shaking as he sank to the ground, forehead pressed to the earth. Maddie sank to her knees, staring at the ruins. The city was in shambles, towers snapped in half, streets torn open, smoke curling into the pale sky. And yet, against all odds, they were alive. David reached for Laura's hand. She didn't pull away. Tyler leaned against them both, Maddie resting her head on Tyler's shoulder. Above, the first rays of sunlight cracked through the clouds. For now, they had survived. For now, the monsters had gone. But deep in the earth, the wells waited. And they all knew, in 15 years, the world would hold its breath again. Because judgment always comes back.